Hey everyone, we're kind of getting set up here. We're a couple minutes early, right? But I wanted to explain with my special guest today. This is how I used to dress as a kid going to the shows. You'll understand why and how later. It has to do with that little kid, which is me. This guy, who's no longer with us. Who is this guy? This guy. But we're talking to this guy. It's going to be super fun. Let's get it ready. As we usually do. Jamming music. Get everything set. Of course, all the messages come in. Okay, doing all the things. But I just wanted to explain, because I'll kind of sort of explain in talking, but like, this is how I used to dress as a kid, after that kid, and visiting these guys out on the road and hanging out on the road and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to talk about that. Our late friend Kenny Rogers.
Hey there, can you hear me?
I can hear you. How you doing, man?
Good. Is this a clear audio?
It is. It
Okay.
is. I'm just double checking some levels here.
And you don't have any video on me, right?
Not on you. Nope. I've got a video on me just for those. It'll be the same as the podcast. Just kind of you'll understand when I start explaining real quick. I do something for my guests, video wise, for each guest, something special. So, and those that want to watch a video rather than listen to a podcast. So,
Right.
but how have you been?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty
Good,
good.
good.
Keeping busy.
Good. Well, I won't. I let everything go organic. I've got talking points and stuff like that. But you let me know if it's like, hey, I gotta go, or hey, whatever, thanks, type of thing, and we'll, all of it's not live. It's all post prod, so we can edit how we need to. But yeah.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Yeah.
So you go ahead and just direct me.
Yes. Give me like 1 to 2 seconds of just silence, and I'll kind of do an intro, and then we go from there. And it's whatever, we'll go from there.
Okay, great.
I'll let you know that video-wise too, especially for you, because people like you. I've got your book sitting to my right here, so it'll always be on camera. Obviously, we'll talk about that a bit and promote it and make sure everybody knows how to get it and all that sort of stuff too. So,
Perfect.
all right. Hello and welcome to Cursology. My special guest today I have known for over 30 years, which is hard to believe because I'm only like 25. But I've known this guy and watched him play. He was on tour with the late, great Kenny Rogers. You can see his book next to me. You can see his picture right there. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Chuck Jacobs.
Hey, hi, Chris.
How's it going?
I'm doing well. I hope you're doing well. And you, if I remember correctly, you moved away from Florida and up in Georgia now. Is that right?
Yes, we have been here for about 6 months now, and we are just outside of Atlanta. So we left you to Florida. You're still in Tampa?
Yeah, in near Clearwater, right?
Excellent. Still enjoying it down there?
Yeah, the summer's a little hot, as you know.
Yep.
But all other than that, we actually really enjoy being here. We were in California for almost 30 years, 29 years in Burbank.
Wow.
And then we knew that Kenny was preparing to retire, and so we had planned to move down here in 2018. which we did, and and Kenny had planned to do 40 or 50 dates in 2018.
Okay.
On our as we were driving across the country down to Florida in the beginning, the first week of April
Mm-hmm.
in 2018, we got a phone call, and Kenny said that he was just too tired and he couldn't make it anymore, and due to his doctor's wishes, he had to cancel all the tour dates in 2018, and he wasn't going to be touring anymore. So it was going to be a full retirement at that time.
Yeah.
So it was a little surprising, but we sort of knew it was coming, and so our plan to move down here was probably timely.
Yeah.
As far as just you lose the income of working with a legend like Kenny, and although things have still gone okay since then, we sort of knew that would be a change, and it costs a lot more to live in California than it does in Florida. So
Yeah.
it was the right move for that reason, and we have a lot of friends here anyway, and so it was a great move.
Yeah. And you had, I mean, since we're kind of into it, I mean, I want to let you know, first of all, we do this behind the scenes. It's kind of just a video podcast going along as we're speaking here for those that want to see something on YouTube as opposed to just listening to a podcast. But let me explain for those that can't see. So I do something special for every guest, whether it's a backdrop or something like that. So, of course, we have your book here, which is Chuck Jacobs' 40 Years with the Legend Kenny Rogers, Behind-the-Scenes Stories and Adventures with Kenny Rogers. Please check this out. Of course, I'm biased, but it is such a fun read, just to get insights into things you may want to know about our late great friend and your adventures. But also, I've got a picture here. That's one of the very first times I saw you guys on the road, and I am dressed unusual for my podcast. I usually am very chill, very calm, very ball cap and comfy clothes. But I went back to how I used to dress, seeing you guys on the road, with the Bloodline stereotype blazer with the solid colored shirt underneath. So
About that, yeah.
in your honor, that's why I'm dressed like this. But with that, Bloodline was Kenny's band, and there were a handful of you that actually just a select couple that were there for the longest time, and you spent 40 years with him on the road. What was that like? How did you even get involved with Kenny as he was becoming Kenny?
Well, it is a little bit of an interesting tidbit or story. I think I covered that, if I remember correctly, in the first chapter of the book.
Mm-hmm.
How did you gig with Kenny Rogers? That is always a very common question. And prior to working with Kenny, I'd worked with several different groups, from rock and roll to funk and rhythm and blues and jazz. As it happened, the gig right before Kenny was a jazz trio, and I lived in New York City from 76 through the end of 78, so about 3 years. And when Kenny would come through the New York area, New Jersey or New York, one of the guys in the group, Edgar Struble, and I had worked together in the early 70s, 73, 74, 75.
Right.
And Edgar was working with Kenny. And so when they would come to town, if I wasn't working with the jazz trio, then Edgar would invite me out to come to the show. So my wife Susan and I would go see the show. We saw it several times,
Mm-hmm.
and got to know the guys in the band and Kenny somewhat. And as it happened at that time, Kenny had 3 keyboard players, which he continued to when I joined the group, but he had 3 keyboard players.
Okay.
And that really was unusual, but it was handy because a lot of the ballads that he did and everything had lush string arrangements and orchestrations that couldn't be covered by just 1 or 2 keyboards. And so the 3 keyboards was really handy.
I bet.
And one of the keyboard players, Gene, Golden played bass with his left hand, which was a little unusual, but some groups did that, and it was additionally unusual because Kenny was a bass player, as many people might remember. He
Right.
played bass in the first edition. So at that time, Gene was playing bass on the keyboard with his left hand, and sometimes, the few times that I came to visit, one time I remember a couple times I brought my bass with me, and they always did a sound check and invited me to come and sit in just to jam around and play a little bit, and I did that with the group, and that was fun. And I remember one time we were in New Jersey, and they were playing, and Randy and I became friends. Was a real he's a great jazz guitar player, and so he knew that I played jazz, and so we hit it off real close. And he said, "Hey, why don't you come back to the hotel room and with us and jam a little bit after the show?" So I had my bass and a small amp, and I went to the hotel room, and he and I just started playing songs, and in the sort of a jazz flavor, and we're having fun. And a few of the guys from the Kenny group and a few guys from the Dottie West group were in the room just enjoying the music.
Mm-hmm.
And we played till, 1, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. And it turned out, we didn't know this, but it turned out the next day, the guys found out, I had left and went home, of course, and the guys found out that Kenny was in the room next door. Well, Kenny wasn't really a fan of loud noises when he was trying to sleep, but he didn't complain. He must have liked what he heard, and that was probably in '78 sometime, early '78, and I went, continued to play that jazz trio group, and I remember we went out to California. We were playing out there, and at a jazz club in Beverly Hills, and it was probably November, December of '78,
Mm-hmm.
and I was just on a fluke. I called up Bobby Daniels, who was the sort of quasi leader of the group at that time. He played drums at that time, and said, "Bobby," I said, I know you don't need a bass player, and you're not looking for a bass player, but if it ever comes time when you want to have a bass player. This was the beginning of December of '78. I said, there comes a time when I want to have a bass player. I don't know if I would really want to do it or if I'd be the right guy, but I'd like to throw my hat in the ring.
Yeah.
And it was sort of that lighthearted comment. It wasn't like, "Hey, can you hire me?" That type of thing. It wasn't that at all. And he said, "Well, that's a good idea. I'll keep your name in mind." Not more. 2.5, maybe 3 weeks later, I was in Michigan at my mother-in-law's house for Christmas. They always used to go there on Christmas time.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a call first from Edgar. And Edgar said, "The guys have been talking, and Kenny wants to add a bass player." Wow, that's kind of weird, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just out of the blue, because again, I stress he hadn't had a bass player prior to that. I said, "Is that right? Really? Wow." He said, "Yeah, we're going to be going into the Riviera Casino and playing the main room with an orchestra, and Kenny feels like it would be a good idea to have a real bass player instead of having Gene play bass on the keyboard."
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Well, geez, that's wild." He said, "They'd like to have you join up with us." I said, "Oh my God, that's a shock." Now, you have to remember at that time, my mindset was into playing jazz and country music. And at that time, Kenny's big hit was Lucille and then Daytime Friends and Love 'Em or Something Like It. Mm-hmm. Those were real strong country songs. They weren't pop, semi-pop or pop the way they became later. They were all real country. And so my first thing that went through my mind is, geez, that's such a drastic change in musical style between I was playing a jazz trio, so just 3 of us, create music, versus now 7 people in the band playing country. and the the parts that I would play on bass were not to take anything away from country bass, but it was a lot more simple,
Ah.
and that's what was required versus what I was playing in the jazz performance. So I said, "Well, Edgar, I don't know. I have. Could I think about it overnight?" And he said, "Well, of course, sure, no problem." And so I did. I thought about it overnight, and my wife and I sat down and talked about it, and actually put pen to paper and said, "Well, what are the pros and cons about joining up with the Kenny Rogers band or staying with the trio, the jazz trio that I was playing with?" Now,
Mm-hmm.
you remember that jazz trio, although it was somewhat remunerative. I mean, didn't make a lot of money. Jazz artists don't make a lot of money to begin with,
Yeah.
and we didn't work all that much. When I worked, I made a pretty good amount of money, but we didn't work every week.
Mm.
So that being said, that was one determining factor. Well, if we ever wanted to have a family, having a regular income would be a good thing to have there.
Right.
And so a number of other factors went into it, and I decided, and we decided that it would be the right thing to do. So next day I talked to Edgar and I said, "Yeah, I think that'd be great." And he said, "Well, that's fantastic." He said, "What they'd like you to do is they'd like you to fly down." This was now just about the beginning. It was the end. It was Christmas time, so it was just close to the first of the next year.
Uh-huh.
And they said, "We're going to be playing in Miami at I think it was called the Fountain Blue, if I remember correctly, a hotel there that had a big showroom, and for maybe for a week or two, they'd like you to come down and just sort of play, a little bit and audition and sort of hang out and maybe get started there."
Yeah.
And I said, I'd love to do that, but I have a booking with this jazz trio in Indianapolis for the next 2 weeks.
Ooh.
"Well, we really want you to come." And I said, "Well, let me just put it to you this way. If I was working for you and somebody wanted to hire me away, how would you feel if I just dropped you, at the drop of a hat and went
Yeah.
to them?" I said, "Really, I think it's only ethical that I give this guy 2 weeks notice." And so they thought about it a little bit and talked about it, and they agreed that was equitable. And so I didn't even do an audition. I just flew out to Las Vegas on the 20th of January, and on the 21st of January, a guy set up. I had my bass and amplifier, and I set up with the band and that's at the Riviera in the afternoon to have what I thought was going to be a rehearsal where I would, they'd get to know me a little bit.
Right.
No, that wasn't it. It was a rehearsal just to acquaint the orchestra with the parts that had been written by an arranger.
Wow.
And so the whole rehearsal was just to run the songs. And so in that way, I got to play the songs through a little bit, but
Right.
it was to run the songs and let the arranger make sure that the parts were accurate. Sometimes when the arranger puts them down, there might be a little mistake here and there, and so he'd have to stop and say, "No, trumpets, you have a different note there, you have to change it." Or strings, over, because it had a whole horn section, whole string section, even had a harp.
Ooh.
It was a full orchestra behind
Yeah.
this. So, long story short, the whole rehearsal wasn't about me at all. It was only about the orchestra.
How do you? I mean, you are a gifted musician to begin with, first of all, but how? That is like an actor's nightmare for me. Like, here's your script. You're filming in 2 hours. Go.
Well,
Like, how do
it's a
you
little
do
bit
that?
like that. But I did leave out a step, and while I was at that 2 weeks of playing my 2 week notice with the jazz trio, they had sent me some cassette tapes of the show, and I had those to listen to. If you want to analogize it to the acting, I would have had the script to study,
Right.
But
Right.
they
But it's
sent me these
still that
cassette.
connection though. Like, you still had
So
to.
I sort of got to know the songs that way,
Right, right. But you still had to, you're meeting these guys maybe for the second or third, fourth time ish. and now you're going to be co-workers, quote unquote, technically. Um, was it hard to just jump in and be like, I'm the new guy and here's what we're doing? Or did you click really well
Well,
with everybody?
it was a little difficult. I was encouraged by Kenny. Came to that rehearsal, which was as years went by, came to be an unusual thing. He usually did come to sound checks or rehearsals, but he came to that rehearsal, and he happened to comment. He said, "Hey, I like the sound of your bass, Chuck." Well, I thought, well, that's a good first step.
Yeah.
and so it was, to give you a little side interest here.
Mm-hmm.
When Randy came with the band a year before, it was in 1987. No, wait, 19. I came in 79. He was there in 78. Either 78 or 70. No, he was there in 77.
Oh, okay.
In September 77. They were playing at the Golden Nugget in Las Vegas in the lounge. And that was a little less, a little more informal, you should say, in the lounge versus the main room.
Okay.
And so he watched the first show with the guitar player that was on the band and then he was going to be added as a second guitar player.
Mm-hmm.
He watched the first show, and then Randy and Kenny said, in the break between the first show and the second show, Kenny said to Randy, "Well, go get your guitar and sit in on the next show." So
No! Technical difficulties, I hate this. Hey Siri, call Chuck Jacobs.
Calling Chuck Jacobs other.
We're gonna try this again. All right.
okay.
Yeah, not sure what happened there, but we got it was right before all the weirdness, so I think we got the story wise, which is good.
Did you get the punchline of it? The end of it?
No, I did not. So I did not catch that.
Do you remember what I said before it ended off?
So Randy had gone up. He was getting ready. He went up on stage, playing to sit in with Kenny just to kind of go, and then I think that's when I lost you.
So you got the part where Randy had gone up the night before on the second show. Is that
correct? Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll take it up after that, and you can split it in. So that was how Randy got his first start. But so going back to when I did my first show in Vegas, so everything went fine throughout the whole show until we got to the song Lucille, which was the last song of the set, and then we usually would leave and come back on and do Ruby as an encore.
Oh, okay.
So on the cassette tapes that I got that I listened to, when on every song, Bobby would click his sticks to start each song, you know, click, 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 click to start, you know.
Right.
And so on the cassette tapes, right before Lucille, I didn't hear any clicking of sticks to start it, and all I heard was the bass and bass drum with the first note, boom, boom, you know, for Lucille.
Right.
And so I kind of scratched my head and thought, well, what the heck here? How's it going here? And I assumed that everybody just sort of looked at Bobby and me and maybe we gave a a head nod or something.
Right.
And just started the song. So now fast forward to the night of the show.
I'm so frustrated right now.
The rest of that, you were in a beautiful hotel and you had a beautiful pool to go to in the afternoon, and you know it was a pretty good life. And then in as far as the music is concerned, when you did 28 shows in a row, it allowed you to get tight as a group and get accustomed to the new guy in the group. You know.
Yes. Yeah.
So really came in handy, and so then when that was the first group of shows that I did with the group, and then the next thing was we went almost directly straight to Nashville, where this is kind of a funny little story too. Is my story of how I didn't get to play on a number one hit.
Oh.
Now, what that means is when we were in Vegas, he had not yet released "She Believes in Me." It was going to be the next single released.
Okay.
At one point, he said, geez, Chuck, I really like the way the electric bass sounds on the way you're playing it now on "She Believes in Me," and I like the way I'm singing it now better than what I originally recorded. So when we go to Nashville, let's go in the studio and I'll redo my vocal and you can put the bass part on and we'll go from there. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I'm into this gig less than a month and I'm going to play on a new hit record. This is going to be great. So we go in the studio. I rather quickly put my bass part down, and then Kenny puts his vocal on it, and he comes into the control room with the producer Larry Butler and says, "Well, what do you think, Larry?" And Larry was always the politician, and he said, "Well, I kind of like both of them." He said, "Why don't we listen to each of them and decide?" Mm-hmm. So they did. They listened to the original version where his vocal was the original version, and then secondly, listened to this new vocal version. And it wasn't drastically different, but it was a little bit different. And Kenny liked it. So he said to Larry, he said, "Well, do you like it, Larry?" He said, "Well, I do like it." And Kenny said, "Well, maybe we should do it." And he said, "What would it be any cost involved in remastering it?" Because see, the other single was already mastered and ready to go.
Oh, okay.
And so Larry turned to the engineer and Billy Sherrill and said, "Well, Billy, what would it cost to remix this?" Now you have to remember, in 1979, it wasn't with computers where you would just hit a couple buttons and it would bring up the previous mix.
Right.
This was all analog, so you had to set up the tape and you had to set up all the controls, so the equalization on each channel, and you had strings and you had all these different instruments. It takes a while to do that. Yeah, so what would it take to do that? And Billy said, "Well, we could probably get it done for $5,000 without much problem." Well, $5,000 in the scheme of things doesn't sound like a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. But you got to remember, that whole album was recorded in 3 days, and the budget for that whole album was probably less than $50,000.
Ooh.
All right? So $5,000 was quite a little bit.
10%, yeah.
So when Billy said $5,000, Kenny sort of rubbed his hand on his chin and said, "I think we'll just stay with the other one." And that's how I didn't get to play on a major hit.
So close. So close.
It was pretty funny.
What, I kind of want to get into Tales real quick with you, just because I have questions that kind of go along with it too. So Tales here on the podcast, the podcast is all about connection and stuff and friends and that sort of thing. But Tales stands for Tests, Adventures, Lessons, Entertainment, and Successes. So I kind of break down. It's in the light of James Lipton in the Actors Studio. He used to ask the same 10 questions to every guest. Well, what's your favorite food? What's your least favorite food? What's your favorite curse word? All that sort of stuff. So in light of that, I've created my own 5. So for T, what has been like one of the biggest tests that you've had? Being on the road or being the life of a musician?
Well, that's a good question, and there's probably many answers. From personal tests of being away from your family as much as we were, that's certainly a big test to a marriage, for instance, and because you spend in many years, we did over 200 days. So you would spend sometimes more time with these guys on the road than you would with your wife, you know? Yeah. So that would be one big one. And then there's certainly tests of just managing your time away from home, etc. Right. And because there's boredom when you're on the road. You only work really 2 hours a night, if that. And so the rest of the time is when you really get paid for it,
Right.
So, but in as it specifically gears towards the touring with Kenny, I think I would go with the test. What comes to mind for me anyway, and who knows, maybe I'll come back and say later it was a different one, but was the test of endurance, and that was one of the performances bookings that we did was in Brazov, Romania.
Oh wow!
And Brazov, Romania is a town at the top of a mountain in Romania, right near. It was about, I think, 10 miles from Dracula's castle.
Oh,
So
cool.
it was in what's colloquially called Transylvania. So anyway, we went to do this show, and just the physical endurance level of this. The show was great, and it came off really terrific. And then we had a real early flight the next morning, and it was about a 2-hour drive down to the city we were going to fly out of, which was Bucharest, I think.
Okay.
Is it Bucharest? I think so. It's not. There's another city in Hungary called similar to that. But anyway, I think it was called Bucharest, and we had to come down the mountain. And these mountain roads were like what I remembered it being like is that when you saw those movies of James Bond in Europe, when they would go on the mountain driving crisscross across the mountain. That was what it was like. It was real narrow roads and everything.
Oh wow.
We decided, since it was such an early flight, we decided just to stay up all night, and then got on the bus about, I think, 2 or 3 in the morning, and started driving down the mountain. So, number 1, we played the show. Number 2, stayed up all night. Number 3, we got to the plane on time and took off to fly to Ireland to play our next show. We had a day off, but we had to fly that day off to get to Ireland. We had to go through Frankfurt, if I remember correctly. So we got on the plane and we flew to Frankfurt. Well, by the time we got there, the guys in the crew told us that they couldn't put all the equipment that we had on the plane. The plane was full, and so overweight, so they kicked off some of our equipment. Oh my God. So the first thing is we had to come down the mountain as we flew to Frankfurt. The third thing is we found out that not all the equipment was going to be at the next show. And then the next thing was we flew from Frankfurt to Dublin, and then had to drive from there 2 hours in a bus to get to Cork. So we left when it was dark, and we arrived after it was dark in Ireland. So it was the most physically taxing day that we had in all the times that I was with Kenny.
Yeah, and I mean, and that sounds also, so A is adventures. That sounds like an adventure too. But was there something that kind of replaces that as like, if that's your test, what was a big adventure that you've done? Like, it doesn't even have to be on tour, but that was most of your life for 40 years. So, was there something that you've done in life that you would consider such a big adventure?
Well, I think so. I think in general, you'd say, and this is almost a cop-out answer, but in general, just the whole experience of playing with Kenny for 40 years was a serious adventure. And that's, of course, what the book is all about. It's a collection of adventures, you know? But if you wanted to take one that was really unique, I think what sticks out as one, that was when we were invited to go to South Africa and play at a casino there in 1983, I think it was, 82 or 83. And so going to South Africa is an adventure in and of itself. Absolutely. You have to fly almost 24 hours to get there. It's not all that, but it's close. I mean, we left Nashville, we flew, I think, to Atlanta, and then or maybe New York, and then we flew on a plane to. We didn't fly straight into Johannesburg. We flew to a place called Isle de Sol, which is an island off the west coast of Africa, where we landed and refueled, and then took off again to fly to Johannesburg.
Wow.
So flying that, it was a long flight, and luckily at that time we were given the honor of flying first class, so it was great in that regard. And so anyway, we got to Isle de Sol. We landed, and it's just an island that's just almost like a desert. There was nothing there, and then we remember this is 1882,
Right.
and the USSR was still in full bloom.
Right.
There was a Russian or Soviet plane, a passenger plane, that was there refueling as well. But we had to keep our distance. We couldn't. There were total separation of the two.
Oh.
That was kind of an interesting thing. So then we get to Johannesburg and take a couple vans to go off, about an hour and a half probably, to the casino compound, which was a huge, gigantic, almost like a game reserve. It was just beautiful. It had several hotels on the premises, several pools and activities, and the thing that sort of hit me most. We first got there. You get to the hotel and you go to check in. And some hotels do this in the Caribbean, especially, but this one they did. When you came into the lobby to check in, they had servants there that had trays with either juice or champagne, to give you as refreshment.
Yeah.
So that was kind of nice. And so then we checked in, and at that time. This was prior to the bags having wheels on them. Nowadays you just wheel your bag around.
Yeah.
This was prior to that. You used to carry your bag, and we were there for a couple of weeks, so we had a bag that was pretty decent weight. But we were used to traveling in different cities every night almost, so you're used to carrying your bag. But no, when first of all we were taken to a cabana. Each of us had a separate cabana. And so they had a bellman assigned to walk you to the cabana, and in addition, he would carry your bag. Wow. So it was a young black man that would assign to each of us as we were going to the cabana and taking our bag, and so we got to the cabana, and he had a key and opened the door, and I had some cash, and so I gave him a little tip. And he said, "Thank you, master." And that phrase took me aback, because that was still in place at that time.
Oh, wow.
Apartheid was still alive and well in South Africa at that time. And so he said, "Thank you, master." It was like blew my mind. Couldn't believe it.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was quite an adventure going there, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've been to so many different places and stuff, and you have these stories. Is there something in there that you've learned? Is there a lesson that you've learned? Not music, you didn't learn notes, learn songs or anything, but like something overall that you came out of and said, "I've taken this, like life lesson from."
I think so. I think. And certainly there's other aspects of my life that I've learned things in, but keeping it on the Kenny Rogers vein, I learned. How do I phrase it? I'll describe what it is, and then maybe we'll come up with the right word for it.
Sure.
One of the things I respected Kenny so much for when I first joined the group was how to structure a live performance.
Okay.
What do you do to make sure it goes over well? Now, again, I'll go back to my previous job before Kenny was a jazz trio. Well, in jazz trio, jazz has as at its root improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
Most people know what that is, but those who don't, you don't play the same thing exactly the same way every night.
Right.
It might be the same song, but you alter it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea behind that is that you have nonverbal communication between the musicians to maybe come up with something new, something different, a synergistic kind of addition of the parts are greater, the whole is greater by the addition of the parts together. So improvisation was a big part of it. Now, coming into the Kenny Rogers thing, it was just about opposite. Everything, the goal was to play everything the same every night. And so someone might say, well, which is harder? And that's a good question. On one hand, to improvise or play something new every night, that taxes your creativity to come up with something new, right? Mm-hmm. So that's really demanding. But on the other hand, playing the same thing every night, why do you do that? Well, number one, you do it because the audience doesn't want to hear something different. They want to hear it the way the record sounded.
Yeah.
So that's why you do it that way. You play it the same every night. And then the challenge is to make what playing it the same every night sound fresh and new, as if it was the first time you played it.
Right.
So there's, I think, in my mind, there's equal challenge to both sides of that coin. Now, getting back to what I learned, when I was sat there doing this new group, I did get the concept of playing it the same every night, and I understood it, and I really efforted to do that the best I could. Mm-hmm. I've got the easiest gig in the world. All I have to do is play it perfectly every night. and so while doing that, and especially it struck me when I watched it after numerous nights of doing those first 28 shows in Vegas, watching Kenny deliver the patter, what he said throughout the show, introduce songs, telling a little joke or this or that, which, as you know, having seen so many shows, he told the same jokes every night.
Well, and I was just gonna say, it's so funny that you're in front of a different audience. They've never seen this show, or maybe they did for a couple years and the same. But it's so funny, even after all these years, certain things still ring in my voice. Where even when he came out and be like, "Good evening and welcome. You will be happy to know, no doubt. Those are the two loudest songs I know. My God, if you could see the faces, you could spit it out with him." And there's a comfort in that, because then for those of us that saw hundreds and hundreds of shows, when something went wrong or there was a little blip, that was like our little fun and reward, as opposed to everybody else is enjoying the show.
Right, exactly. That was the uniqueness of it, but especially his talent in delivering those lines as if it was the first time he'd ever said it.
Yeah.
And so the person that had not seen the show would not feel like, oh, he's doing the same old thing. Mm-hmm. He'd feel like that's the first time they've heard it,
Yeah.
And so I was just blown away in my admiration for him to number one, be able to deliver the lines that way, but number two, not only knowing what he was going to say as far as a joke or a line, but every syllable was thought out. And it was thought out and tested previously to know what reaction he was going to get from the audience. And he credits that from going back to when they played the lounge in the Golden Nugget. It was a smaller group, and he would try different material, until he found out what worked, and then when he knew what worked, he would do that. And continue to do that. So going back to my sort of what I learned, it was how to structure a show to get a desired result. When we went in to do a show, you knew what those people were going to do for the next hour and a half.
Right.
You knew exactly what they do, and they did it every night.
Yeah.
And the same standing ovations, etc. every night.
Right. Yeah, that's a pure talent. That's you know what you're getting out for what you put in, and that's rare. It's very rare.
Right.
And so you spent all these years entertaining in multiple forms, even prior to Kenny, and you are still entertaining right now. We'll get in that in a second. What does Chuck Jacobs find entertaining?
Well, that's interesting. And you mentioned that I've entertained before. I had a sister pass away just a month or so ago, and we were at her, send off, her memorial.
Right. Sorry to hear that.
We have sort of a tradition where I have two other brothers that play. One plays trumpet, and the other plays drums, and we always play some music at those memorials.
Mm-hmm.
And it used to be my sister would sing, and so she wasn't there to sing this time. But anyway, we performed, we entertain in that sense. And then it was interesting after that, we had time to spend with the family members, and some of them brought out old photos.
Right.
My brother brought some old photos, and it was really funny to look back. He had a photo of me, one of the very first stage performances I did. I think I was 11 years old, playing guitar and singing on stage. And prior to that, there was a performance of me. I didn't sing or play at that one, but I actually danced. I did the charm at a show, and I was probably 7 years old at that one. But so entertaining has been. I mean, it was in my blood.
Right.
My mother played piano, and my two brothers played drums and trumpet, and they had a friend that played trombone. They had a Dixieland band when my sister played clarinet and sang. So they were 7, 8 years older than I was, so I wasn't a part of that. But they would have jam sessions at our home. I'd fall asleep on the piano bench next to my mother. It was like I got music and entertaining by osmosis.
Yeah, 24/7.
So it was definitely in my blood. So when later in life, a teenager, my parents used to invite musicians from the local town I was in to come over for dinner and sort of talk to me about having something to fall back on. One guy was an electrician, another guy owned an insurance company, another guy owned a magazine store. It was like, playing music is all well and good, but have something to fall back on.
Mm-hmm.
And I fought back against that. I rejected that. and my theory was at that time, and I used to tell them this, if I have something back to fall back on, I won't try hard enough to make it.
Ah, okay.
And for me, that worked. I'm not saying it's good for everybody, but
Right.
for me, that worked.
Yeah, because I'm actually the complete opposite. I studied business in college because I knew I was going to be an actor, but I wanted to study something that I could also apply. When acting is slow, I can form a production company and know how business works, or a management or theater company and know how it works. So that's interesting.
By the way, that's exceptionally smart, and certainly a lot smarter than the way I did it. When young people talk to me about wanting to get into entertaining or music, I say, go to one of the meccas,
Mm-hmm.
and probably the easiest mecca to go to is Nashville.
Right.
L.A., New York, and Nashville are the three major meccas.
Right.
For entertainment, and especially for music. And Nashville's probably the easiest one. And then I say, if I had it to do over again, I think I would go to Belmont College, because it offers several courses or majors of being able to get educated on how the publishing market works.
Oh, cool.
or as an engineer, mixing engineer, or you know, or artist management. All those things are very valuable, and even if you still wanted to be an artist, having that knowledge is extremely valuable.
Mm-hmm.
And if the worst happens and you don't make it as the artist, you have that
Yep.
to fall back on, and it's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
So anyway, I think that answers your question.
Yeah, yeah. The entertaining aspect of it, that you've been doing all your life. So you look back and you still have some things, and like I said, we're going to get to what you're doing currently. But last, the S entails is success. What is your definition of success, and have you achieved it?
Well, that's a good question, and it's different for different people.
Right.
I used to look at Kenny and think about the success that he had. And I remember one time we were sitting at lunch and in a hotel, and one of the rare times that he actually would sit down at lunch with us. Now I'm talking about the early 80s when he was bigger than anybody at that time. We were flying on a private jet every day, and we were playing to 15 to 20,000 people every night for 100 to 150 shows a year.
Right.
It was, and every song he put out went to number. He was the top of the heap.
Yeah.
So one of the rare times that he was sitting at lunch with us, and I said to him, I said, Kenny, do you ever kind of miss having these times when you can just sit down and have lunch like a quote unquote normal person?
Mm-hmm.
And again, relating this to success, he said, I'll tell you what, I've been poor and I've been rich. And if part of the price is sitting in my room and having room service, send me the room service every day. And that was his feeling on it.
Yeah.
and when you look a little deeper on that, the negatives of success for him was 4 marriages that failed.
Yeah.
And he married 4 different women, and he had success in being a career success as his primary motivation in life. And so a lot of those marriages failed for that reason.
Right.
Now, his last marriage to Wanda, of course, it was different. He was married to over 20 years to Wanda,
right.
And it was a very successful marriage, and he loved her dearly. But I always also in my book I write about this, that I credit Wanda with really the resurgence of his career in 1998, 99, when and just to put that in relative terms to the records that came out, that was when The Greatest came out, and then Buy Me a Rose came out. It became a number 1 hit in 2000. He became the oldest country artist to have a number 1 hit at that time.
Oh.
So prior to that, radio would not play him no matter what he did.
Right.
They would say, not to Kenny, but to his representatives, why should we play Kenny Rogers? We already play Kenny Rogers. We play Lady. We play Coward of the County. We play She Believes in Me. We already play him. So why should we play a new song that's untested? And so it was really hard for him to get back into radio. Well, that I think plays on an artist's psyche.
Yeah.
And you kind of wonder, well, how am I going to do it? Well, Wanda came along right about that time and gave him, I feel, through her support and admiration of Kenny, in addition to love, it gave him the confidence to want to make it again, to have a quote-unquote comeback. He didn't need to have a comeback. He'd already done it all.
Right.
But he did, and I credit Wanda a lot for that, and I think it's great. So that goes into success on that side. I always looked at that and looked at myself, and how do I relate to success in that way? And I don't have that same drive. I can only admire it, and I say that's great, but it's not me. I wouldn't want to have a marriage to fail because I wanted to have that kind of success.
Right.
So, success for me. Success for me is the being able to do what I love, and that is to play music and entertain people, to make people happy, to have tens of thousands of people happy when I perform.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not the main artist, I'm contributory to that and
Absolutely.
enjoy it. And then second to that is to have money come in that would be adequate to support me and my family and enjoy life. Not, I don't have to have the biggest mansion or a boat and a Porsche and everything else,
Hmm.
but just adequate to support my family in a adequate way.
Yeah.
So that has been success. My definition of success, and and I feel I've been fortunate to have achieved that.
Yeah, and you have, and congratulations on that, and thank you even for us non-musicians for being an inspiration and showing that it can be done. And you continue to do it. So perfect transition into you are you have your book. You guys can see it here. Again, get it where you can get all your favorite books. Kenny Rogers, Behind the Scenes Stories and Adventures by Chuck Jacobs, over 40 years with the legend. But you're also continuing with that theme by the Kenny Rogers Band on tour.
Yeah, the idea there is to keep alive the legacy of not only Kenny but the songs that he made famous,
Yeah.
which people still love to this day. And what happened is that in 2019, a year after Kenny retired,
Mhm.
Don Gatlin, who was a cousin of the Gatlin brothers,
Okay.
um, Don called me up and said, and just to give you a little background, Don had toured with Kenny. No,
Mhm.
first of all, Don had written 2 songs that Kenny had recorded
Mhm.
on different albums, and then in addition to that, toured with us as an opening act to over 56 shows,
Right.
including a tour of the United Kingdom. So he was very familiar with us, and as it happens, he was a lifelong fan of Kenny since his childhood. Bought every Kenny Rogers album and knew every song that he ever did. So he called me up and said, Chuck, he said, now that Kenny has retired, I just was thinking it would be great to have the Kenny Rogers Band featuring Don Gatlin do some shows. And I said to Don, I said, well, when Kenny, even before Kenny retired, we talked about this and talked about having someone come and sing the songs that Kenny sang and continuing the legacy. And but we hadn't decided who that would be. So you present an interesting option to that. And so I talked to the guys after that conversation and to see if anybody would be interested, and they all were. And and I have to interject here that having Kenny retire the way he did, there really wasn't any closure for us.
Right.
Having 40 years on the road, we didn't have a big party or anything saying, hey, it was great.
And no
It
final concert,
right. It just ended.
Yeah.
Our final concert together was in December 17th of 2017, and we went home expecting to come back out in April with our first booking was already scheduled.
Mhm.
And just like many years in the past that would happen. We'd end off in December and come back in February, March, or April,
Yeah.
So there was no closure on that. So we thought, well, maybe everybody thought it was a good idea, and we said, let's just come to Nashville, get together, and do a living room rehearsal at Randy Dorman's house. And we did, and just to see how it would feel to play those songs again and have Don sing them, And within the first, and we haven't played those now for, a year, almost a year and a half.
Right.
And within, just minutes of starting the songs, it was like we hadn't left. It would just fell right into place. And Don did a good job, and it felt like the right thing to do. So we said, well, let's go to the next step. And the next step was we got a studio, maybe a few weeks or a month later, and went in the studio and did a little bit more to see how it would sound, and it felt good, and we thought, well, this sounds good. And so then I just sort of took it from there and said, how am I going to put this together to get? We had to have some kind of first show,
Right.
and so we called a friend of ours, and who actually was managing a theater in Wisconsin Dells. And I know you came to see us in Wisconsin Dells several times.
Yep. Yep.
And so it wasn't the same theater that we played before, but it was another theater. And he said, "Well, Chuck, I think this is a wonderful idea. I can give you the theater, and I'll give you hotel rooms to stay in." And and he even gave us a couple $1,000s for expenses.
Oh wow.
And they had video there that we could film it in a real theater to have a professional video. So I thought that would be the perfect way to start this. So we did that in September of 2019, and it went over very well. It was very enthusiastically received by the audience, and from that we actually booked several shows in 2020.
Oh wow.
Well, and as you know, 2020 was a catastrophic year for entertainment generally, and all the shows that we had scheduled in 2020 got canceled.
Yeah.
And so many of them were rescheduled into 2021.
Okay.
And so by 2021, we started doing shows, and we did several, and they were all well received, and but people were still afraid to come out,
Right.
And so by the end of 2021, it was into a pretty good run, and we did a show. We did 3 shows in Vegas that went real well, and then that carried us into 2022, and we did, I think, maybe 20 or 22 shows in 2022, and are doing about that same amount of them or more in this year.
Oh nice.
So it's just it's been it's been a really tremendous enthusiasm from the crowds that have turned out. And Don, great job. He has, nobody can do what and be Kenny, but he has a great voice. He doesn't try to sound, but and some people say he does, but it's not his intention to mimic.
Right. He's not an impersonator. Yeah.
It's not a sound-alike or look-alike,
right.
But he was influenced by Kenny very throughout his life, so it's natural that he sounds a little bit like, delivers similarly. And his entertaining style is similar to Kenny. Kenny had a more relaxed, subtle way of doing his patter and what he talked about on stage and stuff. And Don has a more enthusiastic way of doing it and getting the crowd in. But both of them engaged the audience, and that was the key.
Right.
And so in our show, what we do with the Kenny Rogers Band featuring Don Gatlin, which is, by the way, if anybody wants to see more about that, they can go to KennyRogersBand.com. It's real simple. Just KennyRogersBand.com. And there's videos of us performing and stuff. But part of what makes our show unique is we have videos of our previous performances, and there's stories that we tell individually about different songs and our time on the road. So it's engages the audience in more than just playing the songs.
Right. Now I have to ask you, because it's kind of a flip. I hear it, and having known you for so long and known Kenny for so long, how does it feel to you that now the eyes and more of the attention is on like you and the band, as opposed to being the backup band for Kenny or Kenny's band, backup in the sense of because you're behind him. Does it feel different that you're kind of the feature now, as opposed to Kenny?
Well, that is interesting, and it's part of it because the Kenny Rogers Band is the primary draw, and why would they come see songs by Kenny Rogers if they could go see somebody that looked like him and maybe sounded like him? Why would they come to see us instead?
Right.
And the reason is, tribute bands are very popular right now, and
Right.
and I always say we're not a tribute band. We are the band
Right.
that toured with Kenny for 40 years. And so it's interesting when you talk about Kenny having been the main spotlight. There was a joke that some friends of ours used to talk about when they would watch us on stage, and they would say, you ought to call yourselves the Silhouettes. And I said, why is that? He said, well, because the lighting is such that you guys are all just sort of dim gray figures in the background. You're still... And it was mainly that. It was to feature Kenny, and that's understandable. And we were fine with that. Mm-hmm. Now, moving into this new era, as you described it is different, and it's a higher responsibility of being engaging the audience with our smiles, our activity, and not just being the background. So it's interesting, and it's a little more work in a sense, but it's so far it's proven to be successful.
That's good, and that's so cool because it is so unique. Because you're right, everybody is a tribute band now, right? So there in a rare occasion, maybe you have one member that used to kind of sort of be in the Eagles or Lynyrd Skynyrd or Jefferson Airplane or something. You guys are the band, and so it's so unique to say. Now we get to, and like you said, you share stories from the stage, and it's not interactive in this. I don't think you're not taking questions from the audience, but like it's so different to be so unique that Don's great. He's a great talent, but he's not the attraction. It's actually the band, and that's so unique.
But you need that front man to engage the audience.
Correct.
And one of the things that we do that's really, and Don brought this idea to the show, is at the end of the show, right before the last two songs are going to be The Gambler and Through the Years. Mm-hmm. And so before we do those last two songs, he says to the audience, now if there's any song that you have not heard tonight that you want to hear other than those two songs, yell them out and we'll do a little bit of it, a verse and a chorus maybe, something like that. Wow. So we call that the Kenny Speed Round. And so it becomes sort of the stump the band,
Yeah.
And it's kind of fun because we've been there so long, we know virtually all of them. Now there's some songs, to be candid, that somebody will pull off an album that we didn't do with Kenny live, so we might know them, And in some cases, Don actually would know it. And so once or twice, he's actually sung a verse of it, just a cappella, just to satisfy the audience.
Yeah.
But it's fun, and that gives the audience something to be a part of, to engage them and to feel that they're a participant in it.
Right, and that's so important, and that's why I think, Kenny was so successful, and those that continue to do it. Kenny's not the only one that does it, but when you go to a live event, yes, it's about the comedian or the music or whatever you're watching. But if you feel that you're part of it, the memories from the songs take you back. But when Kenny would do his shtick with the ties and the money and stuff, that's showing the audience that I'm here with you and I know you're out there. You're not just mannequins staring at me and listening. It's let's have some fun. Let's throw some frisbees or tambourines and and show that I appreciate you being here. And so I love that that's kind of what you guys do. Like you said, it's a tribute to him to kind of, we hear you out there, we see you out there, so what do you want to hear?
Yeah, we want to have him be a part of it. Exactly.
Absolutely. Are there other things that you're doing kind of while you're not out on the road with the Kenny Rogers Band, or you're just enjoying life in Florida?
Well, I have actually. I mean, this is not as applicable to the entertaining side, but for really since 1997, I think I started doing websites, creating websites and graphic design.
Right.
And so I have a company called jacobswebdesign.com, and I have done websites. I mean, as early as 2001, I think it was. I did the Ringo Starr and his All Stars band website. And I think it did actually in 2000, because in 1998 we were in New York, and I was walking on the street and I happened to run into the guy who was the manager for Ringo Starr and the All Star band.
Oh, cool.
And we just started. I had a Kenny Rogers jacket on, so he actually stopped me and we engaged me in conversation. And we talked. And long story short, I ended up doing that website for 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, probably 3 or 4 years.
Nice.
And so, and then, and and so anyway, that company, Jacobs Web Design, developed quite a wide variety of clients, and I've had those, and I do a lot of maintenance on those, and so I keep busy doing that, and in graphic design. That was something I could do even while I was on the road, know, and I did do that while on the bus and everything else, and end up working on the bus in the early days of getting online, with the computer through your cell phone. I would do that, and then it developed where you had that more regularly as a hotspot and stuff. So that's been something that's creative, and it's kept me busy, and something I enjoy doing, and still makes a little money. And then of course the book. I wanted to write the book, and I actually talked to Kenny about writing it in the last year, 2017, that we were on tour. And he thought it was a great idea and said, if there's anything I can do to help, I'll be happy to. And stupid me, I didn't get it done in time for him to help me with it. But it was, I did have his blessing to do it. And of course, there's only good things about the tour, because by and large, that's all there was, good things, So it was really fun to reminisce, and there's a lot of pictures in it. And not to pat myself on the back, but so far everybody, I haven't had any negatives from anybody, only positives.
Good.
Enjoyed the read. And you can get, if you go on Amazon.com, you just put in Kenny Rogers or Kenny Rogers, Chuck Jacobs, and you'll find it come up. Or if you wanted to have an autographed copy, you can go to my website and order a copy there, and the order will come directly to me, and then I'll fill the order from my home and sign it for you and send it out to you. And that, if you want that, you go on to 40yearswiththelegend.com, just 40, and then withthelegend.com. And that brings the website where you can purchase the book right there on the website, and you can even put in what inscription you'd like me to write, and I'll be happy to do that.
Nice. Well, I definitely had to get my autographed copy, which is the one sitting next to me, because knowing you for our 30 plus years, I definitely support friends and love it. Like, the stories in there go into even more detail than we went today talking about them. So yeah, I love it. I've got to get out to see you guys as the Kenny Rogers Band, just to kind of see all the guys and yourself again. And I treasure our friendship. I remember going out to lunch with you just as the Kenny Rogers Band concept was being thrown around, and I loved that afternoon with you in Florida.
Right. Well, hopefully we'll have something nearby in the Atlanta area. I'm sure we will sooner or later. And it would be great to see you and Danielle to come out to the show as well.
Absolutely. Well, Chuck, I appreciate your time. Thank you for taking some time to chat with us. And everybody out there, once again, make sure you grab the book, Amazon, or 40 Years with Kenny Rogers, the Legend. KennyRogersBand.com, or if you're in the need for some graphic design or a website yourself, keep Chuck the pioneer of remote work, I feel. JacobsWebDesign.com. Again, thank you, sir. Let's keep in touch. I appreciate it. Everybody out there, please continue to take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and we will see you on the next episode. Thank you, Chuck.
All right. Love you, Chris.
Love you, man.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.